I was going through my storage unit and I noticed this edger sitting out of the way and against the wall. I had overlooked it for a very long time and I couldn't even tell you when I got this thing. I finally decided to get it out and see if I can get it running again, but I got more than I bargained for, and to be honest, I should have left it right where I found it. In today's video, we look at this Weedeater brand edger, and since I don't remember how or where I got this thing from, I can't tell you what the issue is with it. Now, more than likely, it's not going to start, and I can say that because that's the case 9 times out of 10. If you're not aware of this, equipment like this cannot be left alone without taking some precautions, and that did not happen here, so more than likely, it's going to need a full inspection. Now, I'm going to try and repair this edger, however, it may not be the exact repair you need to make to yours. We'll explore other options later in the video. Now, we're only going to mention what these other options could be. We don't have enough time to look into them, but if you need more information on these options, you're welcome to ask as many questions as you need to. The first thing I want to do is look over the edger and see what kind of condition it's in, and to tell you the truth, it's in really good condition. It's not missing anything and there's hardly any damage to it. The next thing I want to do is check the health of the engine by slowly pulling on the rope and seeing if I can feel the engine fighting back, and I'm glad to say it is fighting back, so I'm certain the engine has enough compression to start and run. Now that I know the engine is somewhat healthy, I'm going to see if it'll start and run after I put some fuel into the carb's throat. However, getting to it is going to be a bit tough, so I'll have to remove the air filter and spray what I can into the intake. So luckily it started and ran for a few seconds, which is great news, and it sounds pretty good as well. Now the air filter is still in good condition and has not broken down in any way, so I'll just give it a good cleaning and then let it dry in the sun. After that, I'm going to give the edger a quick cleaning before I continue with the repair. In my past videos, I used to not clean the items I worked on, which is completely fine if you don't, but I used to get some of the most interesting comments about prior to my work or some other version of the same concept. Now, I always considered repairing the piece of equipment more important than making it look good, but I started to realize a terrible consequence to not cleaning it, aside from getting snarky comments. When I didn't clean the items, I would get dirt and grease on my hands while I was working, and when handling small internal carb parts, this was not an ideal situation. I would then have to clean my hands repeatedly throughout the repair, which was a real hassle. But since I was filming these repairs, you'd see my hands go from completely covered in dirt and grease to clean several times throughout the video. If you don't believe me, take a look back at some of the videos from a couple of years ago, and it'll be very obvious. Now, on this particular machine, cleaning at least one part is very necessary, and that's because part of the repair is going to require us to take part of the edger apart just to do the fuel lines, which I think is just a poor design. You'll see what I'm talking about here in a minute. I'm almost done cleaning this thing, and as soon as that happens, we'll start taking off the carb. Now, if you do choose to only clean one part of your machine and not the whole thing, I wouldn't blame you at all. On this machine, at minimum, I would clean around the carb, the filter cover, and the area around the blade. The rest of it, you don't really need to bother cleaning. To be honest, I'd rather get comments about me not needing to clean stuff versus comments saying that I don't care about the stuff I'm working on. If you're not filming a video, then cleaning what you're working on really won't apply here. After that, I'm going to remove the fuel lines from the carb, and this is when we come across our first issue. Now, these fuel lines do not last forever and will get brittle over time. Unfortunately, that means we have to replace them, which on this machine is a real pain. After that, we can then remove the bolts that hold the carb and the intake elbow to the engine. Now, I'm not one to critique someone's design, but I really do have to question how this edger was designed. It seems like they wanted to package this as a very small, almost toy-like machine, but it feels like everything on here is an afterthought. The fuel lines run through the body and are diverted by a metal plate. The lines are then sandwiched between the edger and the engine, and finally make their way to the bottom of the fuel tank. That means to run the lines the way they're supposed to, we need to remove the edger part from the machine. That requires us to take off some dust covers for the bolts, remove the bolts, and then split it apart. To be honest, I have ran the lines a different way, and I hate to say it, but I wish I'd done it on this one because we would have saved a lot of time. Once the edger part is gone, we can see how the lines are ran along with that metal plate. After that, we can start to remove the old and brittle lines so we can replace them. To replace the lines, it's best if we take the fuel tank onto the work table, since the only thing holding the tank to the edger was the part we just took off. After looking into the tank, I can see that the filter is sticking straight up, which is something I don't like doing, and I find this to be very annoying to install. If we take a look under the tank, it's very obvious that there are two different line sizes, and the smaller one is for the filter. The reason is that the port on the filter is meant to pass through the opening to help seal it. Now this is the part that I don't like, and so I'm going to change it. After taking off what's left of the fuel lines, I'm going to empty the contents of the tank, and there should be, of course, the fuel filter, but we also get a plastic splice that's meant to keep the fuel return line from coming out. We also get a surprise piece, which is a check valve that goes on the fuel cap. This part allows air to enter the tank while keeping fuel from passing through the vent out of the cap. The next thing I'm going to do is to reinstall the check valve on the cap. To install it, I really should use some sort of a tube, but pressing down on the retaining clip should work just as well. Like I said earlier, I'm not going to install the filter the way it came from the factory. Instead, I'm going to use the same size fuel line for both lines and just lay the filter in the tank like normal. The first line I'm going to install is the filter line, and to help get the line into the opening, I'm going to cut the line at an angle. After getting the line into the opening, I'll then use my pliers to pull the line out of the tank and cut the angle piece off so we can install the fuel filter to it. Next, I'm going to run the return line using the same technique. Once the angle piece has been cut off from the return line, we can then install the plastic splice. After that, pull on the return line so the splice goes back into the tank until it stops. Then we can install the fuel filter to the other line. Once the filter is on the line, put the filter back into the tank. Once the lines have been ran into the tank, we can then run the lines through the opening towards the carb and then place the fuel tank in its approximate location. We can then cut the fuel lines to about the area where the carb will be located at. Since the lines are done, we can now start to service the carb. The first part I'd like to take off is the part with the bulb. Now once the bolts are loose, we can take that part off and we should be able to see the inlet screen on the main body of the carb. And what we see is not good. Now since the filter was still on the fuel line in the tank, these deposits must be from the fuel, which is pretty insane if you think about it. I'll remove as much as I can, but we need to clean it off with some carb cleaner. The other thing we need to check is that these two check valve flaps are flat in parallel with the rest of the diaphragm, and on this type of material I've never found one that was not good, so this one is no different and we should be able to reuse it. Now to safely clean the inlet screen, we need to remove the needle and rocker arm from the other side of the carb, and that's underneath the metering diaphragm. As you can see, some of those deposits even made its way here as well, which proves that whatever the deposits are must have come from the fuel. Now the metering diaphragm controls the fuel flow through the carb, and if it's hardening up instead of being flexible, it's not going to be able to do that. Now this one is starting to harden up, and it's also got wrinkles in it, so we need to replace it. When replacing the diaphragm, just make sure you get one that has the same length stem in the middle. They can be either long or short, and this one happens to be the longer one. Unfortunately, I tore the gasket that seals the diaphragm to the carb, so I'll have to replace it. Fortunately, I happen to have one in my rejuvenation bath. If you don't have a spare, you'll have to order a new one for a few dollars. I can now remove the bolt that holds the rocker assembly to the carb. Just be very careful when doing this because these parts are very easy to lose, especially the spring. Now once these parts are in a secure location, I'll start cleaning the screen using some carb cleaner. While cleaning it, I also want to see the cleaner pass through the screen. If that doesn't happen, you'll have to keep cleaning it until it does. After several minutes of cleaning, the carb cleaner is now easily passing through the screen. Now I need to confirm that fuel will do the same thing, and if it does, I can then put the needle and rocker arm back on. If you lose one of these parts, don't even bother looking for it and just order a new carb. You might be able to find it, but it might take you some time to do so. Now take your time doing this because rushing this part might cause you to install it incorrectly. Now once the bolt is secured, press on the rocker arm to make sure it's moving like it should. If it's not, then you'll need to do it again. Ours is moving like it should. That means I can move on to a flow test. For the test, put some fuel into the pocket for the screen and then press the rocker arm. If the fuel disappears, then we can replace the diaphragm. So here's the diaphragm I'm going to be replacing the old one with, and it looks almost exactly the same as the old one, which isn't necessary, but the stem in the middle is the same length, which is the most important part. Remember to put the gasket down first, followed by the diaphragm, and then the metal plate, followed by the fasteners. Once that's done, I'll then reinstall the bulb section followed by its fasteners. I know the bulb looks bad, but you have to remember not all bulbs are clear. This one happens to be a red or a pink color. Now I probably should have replaced the bulb anyway because they're very affordable, but bulbs are really easy to replace, so I'll do it at a later time. Once the carb is done, we can then install it back onto the engine. I'm going to start with the fuel lines. The first line I'm going to connect will be the filter line. This line will then connect to the port that's further away from the bulb. Once it's connected, the return line will then connect to the port closer to the bulb. Before installing the carb, I want to confirm fuel flow through the lines. I'm going to put some fuel into the tank and then press the bulb a few times. So when pressing the bulb, fuel will flow through the filter line and go through the carb and fill the bulb, and then leave through the return line and make its way back to the tank. As you can see, it is flowing through the lines just like it's supposed to. Now, if yours is flowing to the carb through the return line instead of the filter line, it means you have the line switched at the carb. But if you don't have any fuel flow through the lines, it could mean there's an issue with the carb, and it will either need to be looked at again or replaced. Now, I have to admit it, but installing the carb is kind of tough, so here's a tip. You don't need to do this, but installing the carb, it might be easier if you take off the right side wheel because it's kind of in the way. Now, once all the gaskets are lined up with the elbow and the carb, you can then replace all the long bolts. Now we get to finalize the installation of the lines, gas tank, and the edger part. Now I left this part undone because I needed to check which line was which before installing them onto the carb. Now keeping these lines in the right location is a bit of a pain, but eventually they'll fall into place. After that, replace the edger part, the 3 long bolts, and finally their dust caps. Now I had thought about leaving the dust caps out of the openings, but eventually these openings could fill up with dirt and moisture, which could then rust the heads of the fasteners. If that happens, you could round the heads, and that means you'll have to drill the heads out to get them off, then of course replace the fasteners. I don't want to go through that sort of mess, so I'm going to replace the dust caps. The last things we need to do is replace the air filter that I had cleaned, prime the fuel system, and then choke the carb, and then try starting it, and hopefully everything goes as planned. So it started just fine and it seems to rev okay, but it did need some carb adjustment, which I did not include in this video for one good reason. Showing you too much bad information could get you confused as to what was going on. If the tuning had been straightforward and the results came out well, I would have included it in the video, but this one did not go according to plan. So in the end, the tuning did not get the desired results because it still has some issues after a few minutes of running. That could mean the carb rebuild may not have been 100% effective and either needs another cleaning or replacement instead. Either way, you should be seeing this edger pretty soon. Another reason why this tuning did not go well is that the engine may be worn down to a point that it is able to run, but it's worn down enough that tuning it may not get the results you want. So my question is, should I have shown you an unsuccessful tuning? Personally, I don't like being shown how to do a math problem, but the teacher ends up having a problem and has to backtrack through the process. To me, I'd rather see successful examples than a bad one. And I hate to say it, but this one was a bad one. There's still hope for this one, but this carb just needs more work. Thank you for watching. I really do appreciate your time here. Please feel free to ask me any questions about this project or your own projects, and I hope to see you in the next video.